Hello and welcome to Transforming Tomorrow from the Pentland Centre for Sustainability in Business. I'm Paul Turner.
And I'm Professor Jane Bevington.
Today we're talking about how, as humans, we process the psychological threat of climate change. How are you feeling, Jan?
I'm feeling quite warm today. What do you mean by how am I feeling?
I'm worried about you.
It's probably right to be worried about me. In what way are you worried about me, Paul?
Well, there's lots going on in the world at the minute. As you say, it's quite warm today. That's because we're in a massive heat wave, not the first of the year and probably not the last. And, there's lots of things going on around sustainability that are maybe a bit depressing sometimes. So I worry about you.
I see where this is going. Now, you wouldn't be the first person in this last year that sort of said, how are you? With that sort of nod or a tilt of their head that says they're asking after heartfelt well-being. Well, it's always good to be alive, but it's a tough time to be alive. I suppose that's sort of part of it. And the more knowledgeable you are about the state of the natural world and inequalities and all of those sorts of things, then I think you'd be quite odd not to feel a little bit despondent from time to time. Despondency is available on occasion.
Do you think, maybe it would be easier if I was just one of those people who thought, heat wave, great, an excuse to go out and sunbathe. It's just brilliant. It'll be gone soon and there's nothing at all happening to the planet that we need to worry about.
And if that's where you are, I think that's fine. I suspect not very many people who are listening to us are in that place. But I suppose there's something about having a responsibility as a member of a university and having a responsibility as a member of an accounting profession to think about things more structurally and more deeply and how we can craft a world that might create better outcomes. So I guess I can't just turn off so well.
Right. That'll be £50, please. Although I believe that's probably quite cheap for a therapy session. But yes.
But I also think there's something about one of my colleagues that I work with, and indeed my PhD supervisor, really amazing guy, did tons and tons of stuff. And towards the end of his career and towards the end of his life, he got very gloomy that not everything wasn't solved. So I think there's also something about thinking about your own working life as a marathon, not a sprint, which is, sort of very sort of old hat to say that. But it's also, I think, a multi-generational journey that we're on to think about how we interact with the world, what appropriate might be, what good might be, what kind of outcomes we're looking for. So I think it's not an individual fix and it's not a quick fix. So it has to be a bigger societal thing.
It's something that we need to be aware of, though, is the effects on us emotionally, mentally of
Absolutely,
what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's something we're going to be talking about today.
Excellent.
Yes, because we're going to be joined by someone who is another Lancaster University graduate, did their PhD here at Lancaster, who is an honorary researcher at the Pentland Centre and who is a mindfulness, nature connection and Qigong. Do you think that's how I pronounce it? Or Qigong?
Right.
Qigong.
I think Qigong, but we can find out.
Yeah, we'll find out in a minute. Pronunciation may be lacking there. And a facilitator of climate and eco-psychology processes. And she works part-time in the Scottish Government, bringing systems thinking, strategic research expertise to support organisational change. It is Dr. Nadine Andrews. Hello, Nadine.
Hello. Good to see you both.
Is it Qigong or is it Qigong?
Qi. Yeah.
I was right the first time. I shouldn't have doubted myself.
No, have faith.
That's the lesson. I have faith in myself. Nadine, can you tell us a little bit to start with about yourself, your background, how you came to be working around issues of climate change and nature?
Yeah. So I had worked in the arts and heritage sector for quite a while, and then around 2010. There was a think tank at the time called Mission Models Money that worked in the cultural sector. And there was a national project, a national research project, which I got involved in, which was what were the competencies needed for working in the 21st century in this sector, right? And so I was sort of diving into all of that literature. I had an awareness of environmental and climate change stuff before that, but somehow exploring all that literature took me into thinking about what does success look like in terms of these competencies, like what is it for, right? And so we were exposing this concept of thriving, and that thriving isn't just, making great art in organizations, but also what is the impact on people, planet, on the workforce and stuff. That took me, and I can't remember how, but I came across biomimicry, and it was then in a course on biomimicry, which must have been in 2010, I guess. It was in Schumacher College in Devon. So it was there when I was one of the people who was leading that. It was just something about the way that he was talking about climate change, that the urgency of it somehow hit me in a way that it hadn't before. So that kind of then changed the focus of the work that I was doing to be much more kind of in terms of the environmental impact of arts organisations. And then that took me to Lancaster, actually, because there was a doctoral training centre at the time that was sort of transdisciplinary. It was set up as well, post-disciplinary. It was set up between the management school, design, and computer science. And my proposal at the time did hit all three of those topics. It then changed within the first year, which is kind of what they wanted as well. And that then took me into the world of looking at the kind of the psychosocial factors that affect how we enact environmental values. So if that is clear at all, that was the journey that I was on.
It sounds a brilliant journey. And when you say psychosocial factors or psychosocial processes, can you unpack that for us? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so I'd come across literature and also academic departments which were kind of on psychosocial studies, and some of the kind of the key points which I took from that was how what's going on psychologically within a person in terms of their own how their own mind and body and thoughts and responses, that you can't separate that from the context that they're in, because we're always in a context. And so to only look psychologically or only look at in terms of the individual, you're missing a big part of actually what's going on. And equally, if you only look at kind of social factors and sociological approaches, then you're missing the psychological. And so the psychosocial approach basically comes from the view that these are inextricably linked. I got really interested in what was called in the literature then the values action gap. So you've got all these people who say that they have strong values around, climate and nature, and yet, you're not seeing behaviours that's consistent with that. So what's going on? What's influencing that? So that's the territory I got really interested in. And so the kind of the climate psychology perspective is really sort of dives into the unconscious processes and emotional dimensions around that. And what I did was to kind of combine some different theoretical perspectives into one. So I drew on social psychology, which was self-determination theory. So I was particularly looking at needs satisfaction, so competency, autonomy, and relatedness. And because the way that these are regarded as being kind of basic needs that we need satisfying in order to experience well-being. And if the satisfaction of these needs is deficient in some sort of way, then there'll be some kind of problems. So I was drawing on that literature. I was also very interested in the work around stress and coping, and so the idea of kind of psychological threat and the way that climate change poses psychological threat to whether we're consciously aware of it or not. But then, that then elicits a threat response in the body. And then as a result of that, we will then adopt various defenses and coping strategies. And again, a lot of these processes play out below the level of our conscious awareness. And where the kind of the social contextual factors come in is that depending on, this could happen at an organizational level or at a group level or even a nation level, that how we perceive threat, is dependent on the context we're in. We're influenced by that. How we then, the way that which types of coping strategies we might adopt is also influenced by, some will be more dominant in a group or society level, and then also the kind of the outcomes of those responses are then kind of adaptive and maladaptive in various ways, depending on the perspective that you're looking at. So something might work at an individual level, but it's not great at an ecological level, like denial, for example. So that's kind of what I got really interested in. So it was quite a systems thinking kind of approach, because I was really looking at all these different factors and how they interact. And I was particularly, my research subjects were sustainability professionals. So I was interested in people who had strong environmental values. That was why they were doing the work that they were doing in their organizations. And so I was interested then, well, how do they enact those values as part of their jobs, and what's influencing that? So that's what I was looking at.
Wow.
What did you find then, Nadine, with regards to those sustainability professionals? Were they enacting their beliefs within their work?
Yeah, so I used a methodology. It was interpretive phenomenological analysis, always a bit of a mouthful, IPA. So I worked with just a small sample. So it was 6 people, but you go really in depth. So there was some variation, but what I found was that often that there was a suppression of their deep green identity or of their emotions around climate change, which was a coping strategy, right? And they were doing this in order to in service of their relatedness needs in the workplace, because their jobs was about influencing their colleagues in some sort of way, right? And so they needed to be respected by their colleagues, to be taken seriously by their colleagues. So it was important to have good relationships there, and trusted relationships. And so for some of the research participants, I found some evidence in my data that there was some suppression of those aspects of themselves in order to fit in, right? Because to fit in was how they then achieved their competency needs, which is about how you are effective in the world, right? In the ways that you want to be. But there's a cost associated with that, which is autonomy and inner coherence. So you can see how these different psychological needs can also be in conflict with each other in particular contexts. So I was kind of really interested in all of that, and then all of that, like if you're suppressing a part of yourself, and suppressing any strong emotion takes effort, it takes energy. So there's vitality costs to that. And that was also showing up in the data about, so if people feel like they're fighting all the time, or it fits in with this idea about congruence and incongruence. So the extent to which you're a fit with your organization and its values and goals. So there might be a lot of work that people need to do, and that, that has a vitality cost. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff in this I was kind of exploring, and then also, well, what are their strategies for revitalizing themselves? Because, if we don't have good ways to do that, then that can lead to burnout, which is, of course, what happens to a lot of people, or they just end up leaving their jobs because, they can't handle it anymore.
So when it comes to the climate crisis, do you think it's inevitable if people become more informed and knowledgeable about it, they're going to be emotionally affected by what they learn?
So I don't think it's inevitable because I think it's to do with how people engage with the information. So for example, you could very quickly, within a few seconds of encountering some facts, that go straight into denial. Where you're kind of just immediately kind of you might not even be aware of it, but you're already rejecting, denying, pushing away information because it's kind of too much, right? This isn't necessarily a deliberate, conscious thing. So if people are kind of immediately going into that space, then it might not even go as far into as actually having a subjective sense of feeling and emotion. In terms of what they're consciously aware of, right? But if you're going through a process where you are reading stuff, you're listening to stuff, or if you are opening to the facts of what's going on, and you don't feel worry, concern, fear, and all the rest of it, then somehow you're not kind of really in touch with the reality of the situation. So the answer is kind of yes and no, but broadly speaking, yes, right? And most people will be feeling something.
And I know that you've been doing some work with Climate Assembly and Climate Assembly members. So that, if you like, is a group of people who've come together to actually absorb this knowledge and information and to sort of formulate ideas about what should happen next. So it's not just you're hearing the information and seeing how you feel about it. It's got a sort of proactive part to it. Could you tell us about that work and how Climate Assembly members respond to their experience of the activity of being brought together to address things collectively?
Yeah, so we're going back to 2021 here. So this was me in my Scottish Government role. So I led the research on that. So a Climate Assembly was in process. The members met up over 7 weekends, over several months. And then the Scottish Government then had, and ministers had 6 months to then respond to the Assembly members' to the report, the recommendations that they then produced. And what I was interested in was, amongst other things, was their emotional experience for exactly the reasons that you just asked me about. They're encountering all this information. It's going to have. We had some responsibility to be able to monitor their well-being, and for the organisers to then provide some well-being resources around that if that was needed. And then just from a kind of academic point of view, I was interested in how their experience compared to the population as a whole. So we also did a population survey that summer after the Assembly had produced their report, so we could actually sort of compare what was going on. And then we did another survey with the members after they'd received the Scottish Government response. So we were able to track stuff over a bit of a period of time.
And I know some of the results of that actually suggested that Assembly members, after they'd taken part, were actually feeling increased levels of optimism, maybe about the situation and what could be done. Was that something that surprised you?
I didn't kind of go into it with a hypothesis, but it was interesting. I wasn't expecting it, I guess. So to see that they did have these kind of higher levels. I mean, it fluctuated over the weeks, but broadly speaking, it was higher than the population as a whole. So that was very interesting to us, and we don't know for sure, but we thought that was because they had a strong sense of purpose and direction. So to them it felt like meaningful work at that time, because they were being tasked, big question, how should Scotland change to tackle the climate emergency in a fair and effective way, something like that. And they knew that, the Scottish Government and ministers were going to have to read what they came up with and respond to it. So that's what we thought, that they would have had a strong sense of agency around this and meaning and purpose.
And then how did that evolve once the Scottish Government had looked at what they'd put together and started responding to it? So that later part of the process, how did that go for them?
Yes. So this was interesting. So that was the final time that people met up. And on the whole, on average, the kind of, they were more similar to the population as a whole, let's say. So the kind of the hope and optimism was kind of moderated. And I think probably what was happening there was that the reality of how government works, because the Climate Assembly was just advisory. Although there was a Climate Act that said that there had to be a Climate Assembly, it wasn't that the government had to take its recommendations. So the government response, many of the members felt disappointment around that for whatever reason. And so I think that then affected, the way that they felt, because it would alter their sense of meaning and purpose, right? Because they've now seen, we thought we were going to have this big influence, and then they get a response back, and for some of them at least, it didn't meet whatever they thought was going to happen.
What did your work then tell you? What did you learn from it with regards to the value of climate assemblies, how they might be used, whether they could be more valuable?
Well, I think if you're just thinking about the kind of the emotional experience, because we weren't able to do any follow-up stuff, we have no idea what people now feel, right? But generally speaking, deliberative processes have great value. A citizens' assembly is one type of a deliberative process, but for something which is complex, we know it makes a lot of sense and there's obviously a lot of research around this as well, that for people to be learning about the topic that they then are being asked to take a view on and make recommendations about is so much more worthwhile than asking people for their views on a topic that they haven't, for some of them, they haven't encountered all the different scientific evidence on it. The main issues, I think, are in general, not just kind of climate assemblies, but are to do with having very clear upfront and throughout who is this for, and how is it going to be used, and if it is for a government, then exactly how is that government then going to respond, and what are all the expectations there? Because I think, we already know that trust in government generally is low in Scotland and UK and worldwide. So if there's kind of ambiguities around that, about how people are going to respond to recommendations, then that can potentially damage trust rather than boost it, which is really what you want from a deliberative process that's bringing citizens into decision making.
You've used some really interesting words in our conversation to date, and I'm thinking about vitality, well-being, hope, optimism, and thriving. They're really amazing words. Are they words you use a lot and words that you are drawn to because of the field that you're working in?
It's partly because I also teach mindfulness and stuff. So, yeah. But I wasn't expecting my PhD result to really be about vitality, because it was about values and how people enact their values. But actually, the amount that people really talked about energy was remarkable. And and vitality in psychology is energy that's available to the self for action. And so I got really interested in that concept, because for all of us to be engaging with something which poses so much threat to us in unprecedented ways, it makes big demands on us physically, psychologically, emotionally, and so it's really important then how we look after ourselves and keep our own resilience, not just like me as an individual, but to be able to do that in ways which is ecologically beneficial, because there are ways to look after ourselves, like materialism and just consumer behaviour, which isn't beneficial in a more ecological way. So
yeah, and I suppose what I like then about that, the fact you're putting the social with the psycho part of it as well, is
Yeah.
actually spending ways to spend time with people that build your, that help you thrive, that help you be vital, etc. Maybe it's, it's not a solo game, is it? It's something you'd want to do with other people, ideally.
Yeah, and also the other thing which came out really strongly was about connecting with nature. So we can think about people more broadly as kind of non-human people.
Yes,
as well
indeed.
as human people.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
But yeah, that was a really important, not just in terms of people's all well-being, but also reminding people about why they're in this work in the first place, particularly if that work is something which is difficult. If you're in an organization that doesn't entirely align with your own values, you need to be having reminders of this is why I'm doing this, so that it helps to kind of keep that personal motivation going.
You've had a few hints at this already of certain techniques and ways of doing it. What advice, though, would you generally give to people when it comes to dealing with how they're feeling when they're thinking about the climate crisis or similar issues with the environment and such that you've come across?
Yeah, so we've got a few kind of like top tips that I tend to give people when I do workshops on this kind of stuff. And another thing for language is we don't talk about negative emotions, because all emotions have a purpose. So we talk instead about difficult emotions, because some emotions like fear, anxiety, sadness, all the rest are appropriate, right, to the situation that we're in. But they're difficult emotions to engage with and to feel. So we talk about them as difficult emotions. So for one thing, a lot of people that come to, I'm part of the Climate Psychology Alliance, and a lot of the people that would come to us wanting to be part of the events and activities that we do, or asking for workshops and things, a lot of the distress that people feel is because they think that somehow they're on their own. Nobody else feels the way that they do, and that there's something wrong with the way that they're feeling. And actually just reassuring people that no, it's completely normal to feel this stuff. In fact, it's appropriate. If you don't feel this stuff, you're somehow not in touch with the reality and the severity of things. So it's good you're feeling this stuff. Also, we know from surveys roughly 2/3 of the population feel worried about climate change. Not everybody talks about that. Most people don't. So often we think that, some of our friends and family, we can't talk about it with some other people. And maybe that, they might not be able to handle that. But to then let people know, no, this is common. And actually there are spaces where you can talk about this that are facilitated, by Climate Psychology Alliance and others, so that's a really important thing, is offering spaces for people to be able to, in a safe way, express how they feel, knowing that they will just be listened and heard and understood. Understanding a bit just about, as I said before, about just how the nervous system works in terms of, our nervous systems are always looking out for signs of threat and safety. Below the level of conscious awareness, normally it kicks in with a threat response. All the stress hormones going around the body, anxiety is associated, with. So even just kind of understanding, this is just a normal part of human functioning, and to be understanding that then the things like denial and emotion suppression and all the different things that we might use to then deal with the threat that we're facing is also just part of normal functioning. So that can be reassuring to people that this is just kind of what happens, and then it focuses on not specifically what emotion you're feeling, but how can I learn to regulate in a way that's healthy. And so, as I said, some of that is to do with spaces where you can express how you feel. There's various kind of mindfulness movement exercises that can help to just calm the nervous system down, release tension. Being aware of how stress shows up for you, because what we want is feeling the emotions and working through the emotions is really important, rather than just suppressing them and because they don't go away, they're still there in the body affecting us, right? But so it's how we can regulate our emotions in ways which means it doesn't lead to kind of mental illness or exacerbates any sort of mental distress. And then the kind of more sort of practical ways that, I'm sure you talk about a lot on your podcast around then what meaningful action can you take? And also, as you said, about how you do that then with other people, and keeping a sense of perspective. So it's not all on you as an individual.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of different things. But it's remarkable how just letting people know that the way that they're feeling is actually normal and appropriate alone can take away a lot of the anxiety about feeling anxious,
That's complex territory that you're working in there.
Yeah.
So what's next for you in this space?
So after my PhD, I worked in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for a short while in the technical support unit on Working Group 2, which looks at adaptation. So I'm kind of more on the adaptation side than mitigation, really. And that took me into, some of the territory around deep adaptation and stuff. And so I'm kind of really interested in accepting that some stuff is already too late. We can make some stuff not get a lot worse, but some stuff is already baked in. And so if you accept the reality of that, the question then is, okay, what then? What's the role then? So I run a monthly group in Edinburgh, an in-person group called Breaking Well, which is a kind of collapse-aware group. So it's kind of people who accept that there's already, some stuff which is collapsing, which isn't necessarily negative, but it's kind of just, it's processes, it's kind of what's happening, not just ecologically, but, there are social systems which are kind of collapsing around us. And then, okay, well, what's my role in this and what can we do around this? And for me, that's where a lot of the climate justice work really sits. Mm-hmm. And how can we then build community resilience? So yeah, at a very kind of local level, because obviously mitigation can't be done locally, but adaptation is really where you can have community empowerment. So that's kind of where I am, and I just had some conversations with a colleague in Scottish Government, and we're sort of interested in, would it be possible to have to take some of these ideas about, if you accept that some stuff is, how would that land? We don't know. But yeah, so I guess the kind of building resilience is kind of where I am, and I tend to focus on that in terms of the psychological resilience, I guess, and how that shows up on an individual and sort of group level.
Well, Nadine, thank you very much for joining us today and confirming that it is indeed good to talk and that it's good to get our emotions out there. So Jan can have one of her primal screams as soon as we've finished the recording. It's been really good speaking to you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
There's always lots to think about whenever we have any episode, Jan, about how we feel about what's been spoken about. This episode's been all about how we feel.
Absolutely. And I was really taken by a phrase that Nadine used, which was breaking well. So if we are, and I sometimes think of this myself, if we are in free fall, the best thing I can do is to make the landing as safe and as soft and as, the best landing that you can have for a system that's in the process of breaking.
And it's also interesting to hear how lots of people will be feeling things or having emotions and reactions to what's happening with the climate and not necessarily realise that this is their body, their mind reacting to that particular thing, that sometimes you have a reaction without consciously deciding that's what your reaction is going to be.
And I tell you what, it made me feel much more sympathy for people who are in climate denial, who I don't always feel warm and sympathetic towards. But if there's something inside of you, and without even realising it, that you just sort of push back this knowledge and information from the outset, then that's kind of fascinating that happens, because denial isn't necessarily a logical thing that happens in your head. It has other elements to it, including just emotionally thinking. Because it's hard to think that we're collapsing this planet. I mean, it's a really hard thing to be thinking. Actually, this is real.
Yes, there might be some people who are purposefully denying it. They might have a reason for doing it, but there might be other people who are in climate denial because of that. They're not doing it to be contrarian or anything like that. They're just doing it for reasons that are beyond the easily understood on the surface.
Yeah.
Talking about things that are not very easily understood on the surface, shall we have an episode on AI?
Yeah, go on. You know you'll love it. You'll love it.
I don't know. I'm getting my emotions out of the way now. I will not love AI. Next week, let's look at the potential positive uses of AI. And let's bring in Dr. Mahmoud Riyad, who we've spoken to before, and find out how he's been using artificial intelligence to help analyse modern slavery reporting.
That sounds like a really good plan.
Until then, thank you very much for listening. It's goodbye from me, Paul Turner.
And from me, Jan Bevington.